Hello everyone, this is AndresRestart, and today we have several cool Nintendo Switch 2 leaks to discuss. Among some other interesting bits of news and rumors, we have a developer that's giving us a better understanding for the power of Nintendo Switch 2. We have an update to the ever-expanding list of Nintendo Direct rumors alongside potentially a game that will be announced during this Direct presentation that is another exciting Switch 2 edition if true. We also apparently have what looks to be a leak straight from Nintendo about further offerings coming to Nintendo Classics, and some interesting details that have been discovered on Metroid Prime 4 that may also include an unintentionally revealed mechanic in the game. So there's much to get into today. But before going forward, let me point out I have this goal to reach 60,000 subscribers, so if you find yourself enjoying my content, your subscription would be appreciated. So let's start off by talking about this whole Nintendo Direct rumor situation. Basically, we think it's this week, and by we, I mean me and I'm sure a whole bunch of other people as well. Just a couple days ago, I put out a video talking about how we had 3 sources indicating a Nintendo Direct to happen in the month of July, and then 2 other sources perhaps suggesting teasing the idea as well, perhaps for this week. And so the sources that have come out and said they've heard a Direct is happening in July are Beat 'em Ups, John Harker, and Attack the Backlog. Nate the Hate recently indicated that he'll be recording a podcast soon, and while that's not necessarily for a Direct, some people are speculating, myself included, that it might be a predictions podcast because he heard a Direct is happening this week. And then also I talked about how Nashweedle on Twitter said something that seemed to be implying that he thinks a Direct would be this week as well. But some people thought that was a stretch by looking at this post here. I disagree. However, now we have extra clarification from Nashweedle because he has said, so this week. And many people are taking this to mean, and I think quite obviously, he is more clearly indicating a Nintendo Direct is happening this week. So in other words, a couple days ago, that wasn't a stretch. He is suggesting this week. Now, if we are going to be getting a Direct this week of July, then we should probably be getting an announcement, if not tomorrow, Wednesday at the latest. Fingers crossed, this is true. But something else interesting has come from Nashweedle. Here he's saying in this translated version, heads up, Pikmin 4 will be one of the next games to receive an upgrade on Switch 2. I've heard a rumor that it will be a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, which would include some additions, but I haven't been able to verify this. So we've already talked about how Nashweedle's been getting a lot right correctly throughout this year of 2025. He's proving to be the best leaker when it comes to Nintendo Switch 2, at least so far. So many different things he has gotten correct and really not too much wrong at all. And he has talked about recently how there is going to be another wave of Switch 2 editions, presumably in a July Nintendo Direct, and now he's indicating he has heard that there may be one for Pikmin 4. Now, to be clear, he's not reporting this as a leak express, right? He's talking about how this info has come his way, but he hasn't been able to verify it. So this one's a little bit more shaky than other things he's indicated in the past. That said, I do feel like a Switch 2 edition of Pikmin 4 makes way too much sense. We might be still a little bit of a ways off before Pikmin 5. Pikmin 4 was a late but high quality Switch 1 title. I think we could be greatly benefited by having an enhanced version of Pikmin 4 if that also includes some new content, as we've seen for Kirby's Forgotten Land plus Star Crossed World and also Super Mario Party Jamboree plus TV set. Myself personally, I might be extremely eager to get in on this one. I loved Kirby and the Forgotten Land, so I will be picking that up. Since I already have the game, I just have to pay for the expansion to the Switch 2 edition, so essentially I'm just paying for Forgotten Land DLC. If they're going to handle Pikmin 4 in the same way, I'd be excited to play a better looking version of Pikmin 4 that has some sort of expansion quest as well. That could be pretty hype. So fingers crossed this turns out to be true. Here's another rumor that just dropped from Nashweedle. It had been rumored, but I didn't mention it until now that I can put a check mark on it. Nintendo Switch 2 will have new themes for the menu, but it seems they won't arrive this year. So it seems like when he's referring to the green check mark here, that's him saying that he can verify that this will be happening. However, he's saying these themes won't be arriving until next year. We've been waiting so many years to see themes on Switch 1, that never happened, and Now for Switch 2, we just have the two basic themes again. I would hope we eventually do actually get themes. The Switch 2 is certainly capable of having it, so fingers crossed this rumor turns out to be true. In other news, there is this article from Nikkei Asia that's been doing the rounds where apparently analysts are saying that Nintendo Switch 2 will likely remain scarce until next spring. Next spring? That's a while from now. That is next year after winter, so about a year from now. We just got into summer, spring just ended. And so really there are two considerations here with this. One, given that Switch 2 is a new console, even consoles that don't end up to be that successful are in high demand early on. Of course, the Switch 2 is already off to a pretty hot start, and it looks like Switch 2 will be at least a relatively popular console, and so analysts are expecting here that demand will remain high for a long time. That's a good thing from a Nintendo sales perspective. However, it may also be challenging to meet demand to output enough units. Of course, at the same time though, Nintendo did launch with record numbers. They sold 3.5 million units in just a few short days. This is the fastest selling console in history, at least for those first few days here. And we are expecting that Switch 2 has eclipsed 5 million worldwide, although that's not technically officially confirmed yet. Point is here, if you're walking about in a store and you see a Switch 2 available, and you've been thinking about it, you may want to strongly think about it, because you may not find another chance to pick it up for some time. Moving on to our next story here, WCCF Tech conducted an interview with Virtuous, a developer who's responsible for co-developing or porting a lot of huge titles such as Horizon Zero Dawn, Dark Souls Remastered, Astral Chain, Cyberpunk, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, Hogwarts Legacy, and most recently, Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion Remastered. And they're also working on the upcoming Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater. So Virtuous is responsible for some pretty significant work, and they interviewed specifically Alex Heath, the Director of Business at Virtuous North America, and Owen O'Grady, the Technical Director at Black Shamrock, a Virtuous subsidiary, and they have said some very interesting things about the Nintendo Switch 2, including that they think the Switch 2 can surpass its predecessor. But what we're focusing on here is what they have said about the Switch 2's power. And so it was asked, in terms of raw console performance, do you agree that the Switch 2 is closer to the Xbox Series S than it is to the PlayStation 4, making it easier for developers to port their current gen games to the hardware? Owen, GPU-wise, the Switch 2 performs slightly below the Series S. This difference is more noticeable in handheld mode. However, the Series S does not support technologies like DLSS, which the Switch 2 does. This makes the GPU capabilities of the two consoles comparable overall. So that's interesting to hear. Technically, the Switch 2 is a bit worse than the Series S, but when you account for things like DLSS, Owen here is saying that they are comparable. Moving on, CPU-wise, there is a clearer distinction between the two consoles. The Switch 2 is closer to the PlayStation 4 in this respect, having a CPU just a bit more powerful than the PS4's, so it is more powerful than the PS4. Since most games tend to be more GPU bound than CPU bound when well optimized, the impact of this difference largely depends on the specific game and its target frame rate. Any game shipping at 60 FPS on the Series S should easily port to the Switch 2. Likewise, a 30 FPS Series S game that's GPU bound should also port well. Games with complex physics, animations, or other CPU intensive elements might incur additional challenges in reaching 30 or 60 FPS or require extra optimization during porting. And so essentially, straight from a developer here, we have gotten confirmation that the Switch 2 is indeed very close to the Xbox Series S, at least from a GPU perspective, and from a CPU perspective, as I said, in most cases, because a lot of games are more GPU bound, it shouldn't be too much of an issue, but there will be some cases where more optimization may be needed, or perhaps, as they alluded to, some compromises may need to be made, like, for example, if the game's running at 60 FPS on a more CPU-intensive game, they probably need to bring it down to 30 FPS. The main point to be made here is that Xbox Series S is a platform that receives pretty much every single AAA title that goes multi-platform, and so a Switch 2 by extension should also be capable of receiving essentially every single AAA multi-platform game. And so a Switch 2, when you account for all of the momentum following the Switch 1, the strong support coming from Nintendo with all their published first-party offerings, and what is looking to be far better third-party support than Switch 1, Switch 2 may be well positioned to compete, if not even surpass Switch 2 years down the road. So that's exciting stuff to hear from Virtuous. So a few days ago, Eurogamer reported that Nintendo president says children should engage with its characters elsewhere if they can't afford a Switch 2. Which, if you read this out of context, that sounds pretty bad. And many people are accusing Eurogamer here of basically chasing clout, or essentially using negativity, false negativity, to generate more clicks. As you see here on Twitter, there was context added by readers. This was community noted because many people found this post to be misleading. And so this is what Furukawa, the president of Nintendo, had actually said. It's true that Nintendo Switch 2 has a higher price point than our past gaming systems. We are creating various opportunities outside of our gaming systems for young children to engage with Nintendo characters in game worlds, with one of the ultimate goals being that they will eventually play on our gaming systems. We are closely monitoring to what degree the price of the system might become a barrier. So, when you actually read that through, the president of Nintendo doesn't seem like they're being rude or mean and suggesting that, oh, children should engage elsewhere if they can't afford a Switch 2. The way this was worded by Eurogamer in this particular post clearly was written to incite some rage, and the actual truth of the matter is a pretty reasonable response to the situation. Yes, the Switch 2 is a more expensive console than prior consoles. Yes, people aren't a fan of this, but when you consider economic conditions and the existence of the Switch 1, they do have also other things like the Universal Parks, the movies, and mobile games for children before they decide to get their parents to pick up a Switch 2 for them. But let's now dive into some very interesting leaks here. So a month ago, Nintendo put out a trailer showing us the updates to Nintendo 64 for Nintendo Classics on Nintendo Switch 2. You know, that trailer where they showed us about the rewind feature, the customizable controls, and the CRT filter. Well, at the 40-second mark, people have now just noticed that there are blurred games here in the background, and now all of a sudden, people are piecing together what some of these games are and realizing that Nintendo may have leaked a whole bunch of other N64 games that will be coming a little bit later down the road. And so here on Twitter, at I'mAKuniVT was working with their Discord server to figure out what some of these games are. And as you see here, they believe they've been able to piece together 4 of these hidden games: Donkey Kong 64, Forsaken 64, Glover, and Super Smash Bros. For Nintendo 64. These games never came out for Nintendo 64. A lot of people are wondering what's going on with Donkey Kong 64, what's going on with Smash Bros., why haven't we seen these added yet? I always wanted to play Glover, so I'd be happy if that was added as well. I do think there's a decent possibility that we may see Donkey Kong 64 announced for Nintendo Classics with the upcoming Nintendo Direct, given that Donkey Kong Bonanza is about to come out. Now, in the case of Smash Brothers, they may save that for I don't know when, but if this is being leaked here from a trailer a month ago, then perhaps this is actually also going to be coming out fairly soon. I do love the original Smash Brothers, so it would be a joy to play on my Switch 2 as well as Donkey Kong 64. I don't really know much about Forsaken 64, but I'll probably at least give it a try because it will be there for free since I'm already a expansion pack member. But I suppose I should also say I do have some skepticism here, because I'm just not sure how accurate this all is. It might be the case, but I mean, these things are very, very blurred. It is pretty challenging to make out. Now, I do recognize that the red here clearly is the size for these different N64 games, so we can sort of figure out where these different games should be. And if you look at this one in particular, you see the yellow there at the top, the green at the corner, whatever this is in the middle. I can see how you could sort of figure maybe that's Donkey Kong 64. It's possible, for sure, but there's just a lot of blur there, so I'm just not as confident, but there is some significant blurring there, so maybe this kind of does make sense. Like, actually, this one is pretty believable looking at it here. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that one's pretty obvious. Yeah, and then looking at this one for Smash Brothers, you see the blue, you see the yellow. It's certainly plausible that this is what it is. But I'm just saying, we can't say with 100% certainty yet that this is absolutely the case. But we got something else that's pretty interesting. So, Gladrax on Twitter, this here it's translated, said this: I confirm that you can now dash in the air in Metroid Prime 4. I got to test the game at the Japan Expo. Now it's done by quickly pressing the jump button twice, plus a direction even after an initial jump. So people have made the observation that it looks like there is a dash option in Metroid Prime 4, and here Gladrax has been able to confirm that by actually playing Metroid Prime 4 at this event in Japan, which is awesome. This part isn't a leak, it's just a discovery and a really good one. However, they also said this, and give me a moment to translate here, and for the more observant ones, they indeed forgot to remove the boost ball, LOL. By holding B, there is no visual or sound effect, but Samus zooms in morph ball mode and the controller vibrates. So it looks like, from what Gladrax is pointing out here, in the playable build of Metroid Prime 4, they forgot to take out the boost ball mechanic. And so typically when you're using boost ball from prior games, you're gonna see a little bit of an effect there, both visually and audio-wise. However, that's not the case in Prime 4, but there is still a little bit of an evidence of it because you do zoom and the controller vibrates when you do this. I suppose it's also possible that this might be just the new way the morph ball works in a more subtle fashion and less impactful, but given how the boost ball has worked in the past, I'm going to assume that this is actually more so an issue of this was not actually intended to be there. And so some interesting observations made by Gladrax from their playthrough of Metroid Prime 4 at this event. And just kind of thinking about this has me excited to learn more about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and what I think will be a pretty exciting Nintendo Direct in perhaps just a few days, fingers crossed. I know some people think we won't be getting a Direct until like September. I don't really agree with that, but I guess we'll find out relatively soon. But what do you all think? What do you make of all these latest bits of news, rumors, and leaks? Let me know in the comments below. This is AndresRestart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.